Hey, welcome back to the channel for another video. Now in this video we're going to continue our Windows 11 app building journey. And if you remember in the last video we mentioned that there's going to be a database sitting behind it. Well, that's what we're going to stand up in this video. Our MySQL database on Azure. I'm going to show you how I like to do it. So if you're ready, I know I am, let's get started. Okay, so I wanted to take a moment to review the architecture that we talked about in the last video. So let's put it on the screen. If you remember, we had a backend API we were building. That API is going to be all inside Azure, and it's made up of GraphQL, a MySQL database, storage, and then SignalR. On the other flip side, we've got our Windows 11 app, which is made up of Google Login, SignalR, and React Native. So that's our front end talking to our API backend, which we're all going to build inside Azure. Now, what service are we going to be using inside Azure to stand up this MySQL database? Well, let's talk a little bit about that now. What I thought would be appropriate is that we're going to use a service called Azure Database for MySQL. Now, what is that? Well, it's Microsoft's PaaS offering, so Platform as a Service. What this is going to mean is I don't have to know the VM to deploy. I don't even have to install MySQL. All I'm going to do is choose the version I want, deploy it out, and I can use something like MySQL WorkBench straight away, which we're going to do in just a second. So if you like the sound of that, let's switch across to the Azure portal and let's actually go ahead and deploy our MySQL database. Alright, so here we are inside my Azure portal. Now I've already got a resource group ready to go, so let's deploy it inside there. So going into here, I'm going to go create, and then I'm going to search for MySQL. For me, it's going to come back as my first option in the list. It's Azure Database for MySQL. Click that, hit create, and we're prompted with two options. Which option should you choose? Well, the option on the left is my favorite and probably the reason why I love doing this on Azure, and that's because it's burstable. It's flexible because it can actually burst out based on your performance. So say our Windows 11 app gets super popular, well then it's going to cater for that by expanding out its resources. Likewise, if people kind of stop using our Windows 11 app, well, it's going to scale down. The other thing, if it is a dev server like in our case, well, we can actually stop it and pause it if no one's using it or no one is aiming to use it at the time. So those are our two different options. You might choose a single server, but I'm going to emphasize probably best to choose the flexible server. Definitely better in our case. So let's choose the flexible server. Once we go inside of here, you'll notice we're going to check which subscription it's getting put on. So it's on my YouTube one. I can see in my resource group it's going into there. Let's go ahead and let's create the server that the database is going to sit on. So I'm going to call that SQL Serve app bin pickup and then dev, and then I'm going to go 002 because I already have one. Note, for all of my customers, I emphasize having that 001, 002 because you never know when you're going to need a second resource which you might have to switch over to. After doing that, we'll choose the location to put it in. So I'm putting in Australia East, then I'm choosing development, and then I can choose my compute that I want. So what you'll notice here is I'm choosing burstable 1 to 2 vCores. And that's because, well, I don't need the full CPU continuously. I'm not really sure. I can change that at any time if I want to go up to general purpose or switch to memory optimized. And then also I can choose what I want my different cores to produce. So I could have them having 2 gigabytes of memory or even 4 gigabytes of memory per core. You'll notice then I'm just going to stick with the normal storage, the normal IOPS, or I should say the minimum IOPS and minimum storage. And then I'm not going to opt for high availability, but you could definitely do that. And backups, I'm just going to go with the standard 7 days. What you'll notice is on the right hand side here, I get a cost summary of that. So it's going to cost me $55 a month to basically have this running. Now that's assuming that I've got it running all the time and I'm not pausing it, which I will be in the future. So here I'm just going to go save. And then after doing that, well, I'm going to say availability zone, it's okay for me. I'm going to upgrade the MySQL to be actually version 8 and not version 5. And then I'm going to put in basically my server admin. So I'm going to go bin master admin. And then I'm going to put in a password. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go here. And then I'm going to go review and create. So let's go here and then I'm going to go review and create and hit create. Now what's going to happen is it's just validating that config that I put in, but emphasis on what I said before. So we're now going to have a burstable one. Now this is nice and new, right? So I can actually add my firewall rules. So what you'll learn for Azure, if you haven't already, is that for databases we have to put in our IP. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that behind the scenes, just so that I can connect that up to my MySQL WorkBench locally. So instead of looking at this and waiting for this to deploy, why don't we switch over and just review the requirements for the database and for the app in terms of what people are going to be doing. Now, before we review those requirements, I want to remind you to go and hit that like and subscribe button, as I'm sure you're going to want to know about the Windows 11 app building videos, which I'm going to be releasing in the future. So go ahead and get notified about that. Now, on to the requirements. Now, if you remember, the first one was that residents are able to log in with their Google account. What does that mean for the database? Well, that means for the database, we don't need to store the passwords because they're going to be logging in with Google. Second requirement was that residents prove that they live in an address with a utility bill PDF. Well, not too relevant for the database. Next one was residents can book a pickup or a waste pickup request. Well, that is. And then lastly was residents want real-time updates. Well, that's not so relevant to the database either, more to the API itself. So we're going to do 1 and 3 for the database, and to do that we're going to use MySQL WorkBench to craft our queries. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here we are inside MySQL WorkBench, and kid you not, I'm going to show you how easy it is to connect to the MySQL server that we just provisioned inside Azure. So check this out. Go across to MySQL Connections, hit the plus button. After hitting the plus button, we've got to give it a name, so Azure Dev. After doing that, let's grab our server name from Azure. So we can go here and grab the server name, then paste that into hostname. Keep the port as 3306. Go ahead and put our username in. Well, I'm going to use the admin for this one, so copy that, put that in, and then I'm going to test that connection by putting in the password. If it's all good, you should get this message: successfully made the MySQL connection. With that all good, all we're going to do is go ahead and go OK. After do that, double click Azure Dev, and then you'll notice here we're here, so we can go ahead and go show schemas, and then run that. And what you'll notice is it returns back our schemas on the database. Now what's really amazing about that is all I did was fill in some buttons, fill in some boxes in Azure. I didn't have to install MySQL, didn't have to stand up a VM. It's all running for me. I can now get on to what I really wanted to do, which was design my database. So how are we going to design that database? Well, let's start scripting it. So going in here, I'm actually going to create my schema first. Actually, I'll bring in my user table that I kind of wrote previously. So going in here, let's create the Windows 11 schema first. Let's then use the Windows 11 app schema, and then let's create our user table. Now, notice with our user table, the way we've got the email, we've got the name of the person, and we've also got the Google ID. One notable thing that's missing is password, but remember back to what I said before, because they're logging in with a Google account, we don't really care about storing the password for the user. So with that out of the way, the next table that I want to look at is, well, we're going to have to store the addresses for the user, such where they live. So let's create that table, and I've also written that previously. So if you look at it here, I've got create addresses. I've actually got a comma at the end of there, which I should take out. But here you can see I've got the addresses. The notable thing on this table is that I've got that approved, which is a bit, which represents a Boolean. So let's go here and let's go and create that. Now, what other tables will I need in this? Well, for the addresses, I'm gonna kind of need a suburb ID. So why don't we do that? So I'm actually just gonna drop that table that I just created, because I think we got a bit ahead of ourselves. So if I just drop that, I think inside of here, I'm gonna have a suburb ID. Now, that suburb ID is gonna come from another table, which is gonna list out the suburbs. Now, how can I do that? Well, I'll show you in a second. The next thing we need though is the street name, which we're gonna make Varkar. I'm just gonna make it, we'll say 30. Probably needs to be a bit bigger, but that's fine for the moment. And then we're going to go street number, and then we're going to make that an integer, and then we're going to have that suburb ID. Now that suburb ID is going to reference another table, which I'm going to call metadata options. So it's going to look like this. So you can see here that I've got a type and a value. So the type is going to be suburb. The value is going to be the suburb's name. So let's go ahead and then let's use that. The way we can use that, let's just put another foreign key in. So we can do it down here like this one. So let's just go foreign key, and the foreign key is going to be on the suburb ID column, and it's going to reference metadata options, and then open bracket, and then which field from it? Well, the ID from metadata options. So let's go ahead and create that. And now let's go and create that metadata options. Now we can see here that it has failed to create it. We're just going to have a look and see why. So we can see here that it's gone oh, because it didn't find the reference table. That's because we need to. If we run it again, it should work now. So we've got our green tick, so we're all good to go. So all of them have created. So I can go select from addresses, and we should have that up and running. So let's go ahead and run that, and we can see that coming back. Now that's our database actually all done. So I've got an addresses, our metadata option, and we've got our user, and we've also got our pickup requests. Actually we didn't do our pickup requests, so we should put that in. So to do our pickup requests, I'm going to do a table which looks like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create that. And then we know there that there can be only one auto, and that's because we need to make it a primary key. So we're just going to go primary key ID, and then that should fix that. So let's go ahead and create that. Not quite. It might need that. No, it doesn't. It's probably because we need the open and close brackets around it. So if we do that, that's looking a lot better, and we can go ahead and get that green tick. So with that, we've got our 4 different tables. We're actually all ready for the Windows 11 app now. So why don't we switch across to the summary of what we did inside this video. Okay, so recap time. What did we do inside that video? Well, we deployed our MySQL database. We did it in Azure. Now we did it with Azure SQL Database, and why did we do that? Well, it was great because it gave us a flexible server. Flexible being that it gave a predictable performance. So get this. Let's say the app is super popular for the council. Lots of residents jump on it. Well then, that's great because the database is automatically going to provision the resources for the residents so that they can use the app and it's reliable. But let's say it's the opposite. Let's say there's not many residents jumping on it for a certain time period. Well, it's also going to scale back down and only use what's required to keep it alive. Now that's great for the council because that means that they're optimizing the cost for their database inside Azure. And that's really good compared to having an on-premise database or even that single server sitting inside Azure running all the time. Now the other thing I'd say is because it is flexible, if it's a dev or test environment, you can also pause it. And if you pause it, you're not going to pay for compute time at all and just for storage. Talk about optimizing your cost. Now that's our database, and you can see there that we had our different schemas. So we've got 4 different tables. We've got 4 different tables in the one schema, I should say. So we've got our user, our addresses, pickup requests, and metadata options. Now the notable mentions inside there: user, no passwords, because it's supporting Google login. We don't need to store the passwords. The other one you'll see is metadata options. So metadata options is where suburbs are going to come in. And it's also how we're going to be fueling the drop downs in our Windows 11 app. With that, that's actually all of our database done for the Windows 11 application. Now, I trust that you'll stay tuned for my next video where we're actually going to start building that Windows 11 app. And we're going to do it inside React Native, like mentioned before. So with that, I'm actually going to end this video and I'm going to sign out here. So this is Coder Meets Data, Travis Sansom, and I'll see you in the next one.